As U.S. and Iranian officials meet behind closed doors in Oman to negotiate the future of Tehran's nuclear program, the United States Navy is sending a very different kind of message. Out in the open ocean, at gunpoint, one seized tanker at a time. But what happened next, literally just hours ago, is changing the entire geopolitical chessboard like never before, because it's not just the U.S. Navy anymore. An entirely new player just entered the game, and Tehran never saw it coming. Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve, your Patriot Professor, here to help you make sense of the madness with breaking news and analysis you're not going to get anywhere else. So if you haven't already done so, you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. On February 15th, U.S. naval forces boarded and seized a Panama-flagged tanker called the Veronica III in the Indian Ocean. Now, on paper, it's a Panamanian ship. In reality, it's part of what's known as Iran's shadow fleet, a network of ghost tankers often sailing under foreign flags with fake transponder data, using to smuggle sanctioned Iranian crude oil to buyers in China and elsewhere. If you don't know, authoritarian regimes are often highly dependent on outside sources of revenue streams or cash flow. And that's because the more the government can tap into cash flows independent of their own populations, then the less dependent those authoritarian regimes are on their own populations for consent. So this is key for authoritarian regimes, particularly in the Middle East, who are being financially sustained by oil. They're not being sustained by taxpayers and subject to the consent of the governed, as it were. Again, the key here is that you don't need to have economic growth. You don't even have to have, confiscatory tax policies. Taxes are often very low in these regimes, and that's because they're more dependent on cash flow sources irrespective of their population. So these ghost fleets, these shadow tankers that sail under false foreign flags, they're Iran's way of tapping into the black market of sanctioned crude, funneling billions in off-the-books oil sales to China and Southeast Asia to bankroll both their own regime as well as their proxies in the region, such as Hezbollah and Hamas, that destabilize the entire Middle East. Well, not anymore. The Pentagon confirmed the seizure of Veronica III. This is a ship that's been on the U.S. Treasury Department's sanctions list since March of 2024. It was flagged for transporting hundreds of thousands of tons of Iranian and Venezuelan crude. And that's the key. Veronica III is actually connected to both Iran and Venezuela simultaneously. It holds sanctioned Iranian crude to Chinese buyers as its primary business, but it was most recently flagged off the coast of Venezuela back in early January, right when the Trump administration, just shortly after it announced a quarantine on Venezuelan oil. And so the ship fled the Venezuelan coast, if I recall, like immediately after Maduro got arrested. And American forces have been tracking it across two oceans, from the Caribbean basin all the way to the Indian Ocean. They were monitoring it over a prolonged period before finally moving in for a pre-dawn boarding operation on February 15th. On the basis that the ship had violated the Venezuelan quarantine. The quarantine was Trump's total blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers going in and out of Venezuela, which Trump initially ordered back in mid-December. At the time, it was part of a broader pressure campaign to force then-President Nicolas Maduro to step down. But after he was captured, it's been used to clean up the crude oil black market in our own Western Hemisphere backyard, which involves tracking suspected ships all the way to the Indian Ocean. And Veronica III isn't the only ghost ship to be boarded and captured by U.S. forces. At least 16 tankers total fled the Venezuelan coast in violation of the quarantine. At least 7 have thus far been seized under what the Pentagon calls Operation Southern Spear. In fact, senior officials just told the Wall Street Journal that over 20 additional Iranian tankers have already been identified for seizure. Yeah, you heard that right, 20. So this isn't a one-off operation, gang. This is a systematic campaign to financially strangle the Iranian regime. And here's where it gets really interesting. This didn't come out of nowhere. Iran has been escalating for weeks now, testing the Trump administration, probing for weaknesses. So back on February 3rd, 6 armed Islamic revolutionary gunboats swarmed a U.S. flagged tanker called the Stena Imperative in the Strait of Hormuz. 6 boats. They ordered the tanker to cut engines and prepare to be boarded. Now, fortunately, the captain on the Stena Imperative remembered who was our president, so he hit the gas instead. And literally within minutes, the USS McFall, a guided missile destroyer, scrambled to escort her to safety. And that same day, the Navy shot down an Iranian Shahed 139 drone that got way, way too close to the USS Abraham Lincoln. No warning shots, no diplomatic notes. They just blew it out of the sky. The very next day, on February 4th, Iran seized 2 foreign tankers near Farsi Island. They detained 15 crew members and threatened, again, I'm quoting, they threatened a massacre in the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this was just hours before scheduled U.S.-Iran talks in Oman. And that was the regime doing its best in trying to negotiate from the standpoint of strength. But this is precisely where the mullahs miscalculated. They never imagined that another country would step up and get involved in all of this. And I'm about to show you why that miscalculation could cost them everything. But first, what if I told you there's a hidden arbitrage opportunity in a $30 billion market? Everyday people with no special skills are quietly pulling in $5,000, $10,000, even $20,000 a month from it, all from their laptop. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but here's what's happening. There is a massive pricing gap in the used book market between what books sell for in one marketplace versus what they sell for in another. And the people who figured that out, they exploit that gap. You see, they're building real life-changing income in doing so. And here's what makes this truly different. You never actually touch a single physical book. No inventory in your garage. No shipping headaches. None. No leaving your house. Everything, and I mean everything, is done from your browser. You find the opportunity, you click a few buttons, other people handle all the logistics for you. And I'm not talking about some side hustle that earns you coffee money. I'm talking about a legitimate business that real people are running right now, many of them replacing their full-time income. Now, here's the exciting part. I'm personally hosting a free live training where we're going to pull back the curtain and show you exactly how this works, step by step. No fluff, no theory, the actual system. I've done my homework on this, and I can't wait to talk to you about it and walk you through it myself. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code and register now. Trust me, folks, you do not want to miss this one. It's going to be amazing. If you can believe it, the nation of India has now stepped into the mix. India just announced that they seized 3 Iranian Shadow Fleet tankers roughly 100 miles west of Mumbai, deploying 55 ships and 12 aircraft for round-the-clock surveillance. And of course, those Indian ships and aircraft aren't alone. As we speak, President Trump has deployed over 10 warships to the region, including a carrier strike group, and he called it exactly what it is, an armada. The U.S. Maritime Administration issued a formal warning telling all American-flagged vessels to stay as far from Iranian waters as possible, not because we're retreating, but because the Navy is about to make that neighborhood very uncomfortable for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. Analysts are calling it the Indo-Abrahamic Noose, a strategic economic and maritime coalition between India, the United Arab Emirates, and the United States, designed to counterbalance Iran, China, and Russia in Western Asia. It signifies India's increasingly proactive role in the Middle East to enforce maritime security, as demonstrated most explicitly by the seizing of these Iranian ships. As such, India has joined Trump in initiating a classic dual-track squeeze on Iran, putting pressure on the regime from both the inside and the outside. So, obviously, from the inside, Islamic Republic has been facing its single worst domestic crisis since coming to power in 1979. They're in an economic free fall. The rial, I don't know if you know this, this is the Iranian currency. The rial has lost, get this, 20,000% of its value since 1979. 20,000%. They're currently in the midst of a water crisis. 90% of their water reserves are gone. And the Bazari, that's the merchant class, which carries inordinate economic influence and weight in Iran, they've turned on the mullahs. They want the mullahs gone. So this is the single most serious uprising in 4 decades in Iran. But then from the outside, you've got this rather formidable fleet of U.S. warships in the region. They're seizing Iranian tankers. They're blowing their drones out of the sky. And they're making it clear that whatever gets negotiated in Oman will be on America's terms, not Iran's. Now, what's so key to that is how it signals the total collapse of the liberal international order in real time. The entire post-1945 architecture, right? So we're talking the UN, international maritime law, the rules-based order. It was all supposed to handle exactly this kind of thing through sanction regimes, Security Council resolutions, multilateral enforcement, and the like. Instead, China's openly buying Iran's sanctioned crude. The UN does nothing, as they always do, and the US and India have decided to bypass the entire system and enforce their own will bilaterally with warships. And keep in mind, at least when it comes to the Veronica III seizure, this all began because the Iranian ghost ship, its Shadow Fleet, violated a quarantine on shipping crude via Venezuela. In other words, Iran violated a quarantine policy in our own Western Hemisphere backyard, which is the central sphere of American civilizationalist foreign policy. So Trump has made it clear, you violate our civilizationalist sovereignty, we're coming after you, no matter where you try to hide, including the Indian Ocean. And India will be protecting their civilizational sovereignty in the very same process as well. So bottom line, when the Iranian delegation sits down for these talks in Oman, they're doing so from a position of unprecedented weakness. And in many ways, I do think they're looking for an off-ramp to all of this. But given their circumstances, that's going to be a very hard thing to do, especially now with India's involvement. So we'll obviously be keeping a very close eye on how things develop here. But there is no question, with the latest seizures of these Iranian ghost tankers by both the United States and India, the Trump-inspired civilizationalist order has indeed arrived.